Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. Well, 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 if it isn't another day aboard the Mercy's wing, where the coffee tastes like recycled starship fuel and the medical emergencies come with teeth sharp enough to cut through hull plating. Welcome to Emily's life, where being a xenobiologist apparently qualifies you for every job nobody else wants to do. Congratulations, Captain Morrison had said, with that special smile reserved for delivering terrible news. You've been promoted to chief babysitter of things that could kill us all. The promotion came with a lovely view of Medical Bay 3 and a patient who made rabid wolverines look cuddly. Emily stood in the doorway, arms crossed, surveying her new assignment with the enthusiasm of someone asked to wrestle a black hole. In the corner of the reinforced medical bay, behind a barrier of transparent aluminum that could probably stop a plasma cannon, sat Zadok. Now, calling Zadok a patient was like calling a supernova a light source. Technically accurate, but missing some rather important context. He was a Nethrak, which meant he belonged to a species that had spent the last 1,000 years making everyone else in the galaxy nervous just by existing. 6 feet of scaled muscle, claws that could open a can or a carotid artery with equal ease, and eyes that tracked movement like a targeting computer with predatory instincts. Oh, and he was sick. Mustn't forget that part. So, Emily said to the empty air, because talking to herself had become a professional necessity over the years, let me get this straight. The most feared predator species in known space has produced a juvenile who won't take his medicine. And somehow, this became my problem. Zadok's head swiveled toward her voice with the fluid precision of a weapon system acquiring a target. Those golden eyes, think molten metal with a bad attitude, fixed on her through the barrier. He was young by Nethrak standards, barely past what humans might call toddlerhood, but already possessed the natural grace of something that had never been prey to anything, ever. "Hello there, gorgeous," Emily said, settling into the observation chair with the casual air of someone who'd made peace with the universe's sense of humor long ago. "I'm Emily. I'll be your disappointingly inadequate caretaker for the foreseeable future." Zadok tilted his head, those predator eyes never leaving her face. The medical readouts on the wall painted a concerning picture. Elevated stress hormones, irregular metabolic patterns, and the kind of nutritional deficits that would make a ship's medic reach for the emergency stimulants, all because a baby apex predator had decided that modern medicine was apparently beneath his dignity. "You know," Emily continued, pulling up his medical file on her tablet, "when I signed up to study alien biology, I thought I'd be analyzing tissue samples and writing papers with impressively long titles. Nobody mentioned the part where I'd be playing nursemaid to a creature that could theoretically use my femur as a toothpick." The medical file made for fascinating reading, in the same way that natural disaster reports are fascinating. Zadok suffered from something called metabolic cascade syndrome, a rare condition that affected roughly 1 in 10,000 Nethrak juveniles. Without treatment, his body would essentially forget how to process nutrients properly, leading to a slow but inevitable decline that would make his short life rather unpleasant. The treatment was simple, a daily dose of synthesized enzymes that would regulate his metabolism until his body matured enough to handle the condition naturally. Standard pediatric medicine, really, except for the minor detail that the patient in question would rather die than accept help from potential enemies. And according to several thousand years of evolutionary programming, everyone who wasn't Nethrak fell into the potential enemy category. The good news, Emily told him, scrolling through treatment notes, is that your medicine tastes like synthetic berry flavor, which is apparently the galactic standard for making terrible things slightly less terrible. The bad news is that you've decided to treat it like it's liquid poison, which is really putting a damper on everyone's day. Previous treatment attempts read like a comedy of errors written by someone with a particularly dark sense of humor. The medical staff had tried everything. Disguising the medicine in food, Zadok's enhanced senses detected it immediately, and he'd refused to eat for 2 days. Holographic projections designed to make the medicine appear like familiar Nethrak substances. He'd looked at them with the kind of disdain usually reserved for particularly obvious lies. They'd even brought in a Nethrak cultural expert via subspace communication, who'd helpfully explained that what they were attempting was essentially impossible, and they should just let natural selection take its course. Charming fellow, that cultural expert. "You see the problem here, don't you?" Emily asked, looking up from the tablet. "Everyone's been treating this like a medical issue when it's really a trust issue. You don't trust us because we're not Nethrak, and we can't become Nethrak because evolution is unfortunately non-negotiable." Zadok made a sound that might have been curiosity, or might have been the prelude to attempted violence. With Nethrak, the distinction was often academic until it was too late to matter. The bay doors hissed open, admitting Dr. Gwendolyn in all her professional glory. She moved with the brisk efficiency of someone who believed that every problem had a solution, and every solution could be found in a medical textbook, if you just looked hard enough. "Any progress?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Well, he hasn't tried to kill me yet," Emily replied. "I'm calling that a victory." Dr. Gwendolyn consulted her own tablet, frowning at numbers that clearly weren't improving fast enough for her liking. "His condition is deteriorating. We need to get those enzymes into his system within the next 12 hours, or we're looking at permanent metabolic damage. And if we try to force it? Sedation carries risks with Nethrak physiology, and any attempt at force-feeding could trigger a berserker response. You've read the files on what happens when Nethrak enter combat mode?" Emily had indeed read those files. They made for the kind of bedtime reading that guaranteed nightmares. Nethrak berserkers had been known to tear through starship hulls with their bare claws when sufficiently motivated. The last thing anyone needed was a berserk apex predator loose on a medical transport. "So we're stuck," Emily said. "He won't take the medicine because we're not his species, and we can't become his species because that's not how biology works." "There has to be something," Dr. Gwendolyn insisted. "Some approach we haven't tried." Emily looked back at Zadok, who was now sprawled in his corner like a scaled, occasionally glowing teenager having the galaxy's most dangerous sulk. His breathing was slightly labored, and the medical sensors showed his metabolic stress was increasing. "What if we're thinking about this wrong?" Emily said slowly. "How do you mean?" "Everyone's been focusing on the medicine itself, making it taste better, look different, seem less threatening. But what if the problem isn't the medicine? What if the problem is who's offering it?" Dr. Gwendolyn raised an eyebrow. "I'm not following." Nethrak are pack hunters, right? Social predators. They learn by watching other pack members, especially those they trust. What if Zadok isn't refusing the medicine because it's dangerous? What if he's refusing it because no one's shown him it's safe? "Emily, that's—" Dr. Gwendolyn paused, her medical training warring with what sounded like complete madness. "That's not how medicine works." "Maybe not with humans," Emily said, standing up and moving closer to the barrier. "But we're not dealing with humans, are we?" Zadok's eyes tracked her movement, those predator instincts cataloging her position, her posture, her potential threat level. Emily found herself wondering what she looked like through those eyes. Probably like a particularly slow-moving piece of prey with delusions of competence. The cultural expert said it was impossible, Dr. Gwendolyn pointed out. The cultural expert also suggested we let him die, Emily replied. I'm starting to think maybe we shouldn't take his advice on bedside manner. She pressed her hand against the transparent aluminum barrier, studying Zadok's reaction. He didn't flinch or retreat, just watched her with that unblinking intensity that made her feel like she was being evaluated for some purpose she couldn't quite grasp. You know what your problem is? She asked him. You're too smart for your own good. You can smell deception, can't you? All those people trying to trick you into taking medicine, disguising it, hiding it, making it seem like something it's not. No wonder you don't trust us. Zadok made another one of those ambiguous sounds, this one carrying what might have been agreement, or might have been hunger. Emily chose to interpret it optimistically. So here's what I'm thinking, she continued, more to herself than to anyone else. Maybe it's time someone tried being honest with you. Dr. Gwendolyn looked at her with the expression medical professionals reserved for colleagues who were about to do something spectacularly stupid. Emily, whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking, Emily said, that it's time someone showed our friend here that trust works both ways. She turned away from the barrier, already formulating a plan that was either brilliant or catastrophically insane. With her track record, it was probably both. The next morning brought all the joy and wonder of a diplomatic crisis wrapped in a medical emergency, served with a side of species-threatening stupidity. Emily arrived at Medical Bay 3 to find Dr. Gwendolyn surrounded by enough equipment to perform surgery on a small moon. All of it pointed at one increasingly irritated Nethrak juvenile. Please tell me you haven't been here all night, Emily said, noting the coffee stains on Gwendolyn's uniform and the slightly manic gleam in her eyes that suggested someone had been mainlining caffeine and frustration in equal measure. His enzyme levels dropped another 15%, Gwendolyn replied, without looking up from her scanner readings. We're running out of time, and I've run out of conventional options. Zadok, for his part, looked like he'd spent the night plotting the downfall of modern medicine in general, and medical transport vessels in particular. His scales had taken on a darker hue, a stress response that made him blend almost perfectly with the shadows in his corner. The medical readouts painted an increasingly grim picture. His body was essentially eating itself from the inside out, one enzyme deficiency at a time. What's the latest brilliant solution? Emily asked, settling into her observation chair with the weary resignation of someone who'd learned to expect disappointment as a baseline. Nurse Thompson suggested we try aromatherapy. Emily blinked. I'm sorry, what? The theory being that certain scents might trigger positive associations and reduce his stress response to the medicine. And how did that work out? Dr. Gwendolyn gestured toward a corner of the bay, where several pieces of expensive aromatherapy equipment sat in what appeared to be the aftermath of a small explosion. Zadok apparently finds the scent of lavender deeply offensive. Who knew that relaxing humans and relaxing apex predators required different approaches? Shocking, Emily said dryly. It's almost like evolution equipped different species with different preferences. The morning's entertainment continued, with engineering specialist Parks, who'd apparently watched too many nature documentaries and decided that what Zadok really needed was a mechanical replica of a Nethrak parent to administer the medicine. The result looked like someone had crossed a food processor with a suit of armor and given it serious psychological problems. The movement patterns are based on extensive behavioral analysis, Parks explained proudly as his creation lurched toward Zadok's enclosure, with all the natural grace of a drunk robot. It should trigger his instinctual response to accept food from a parent figure. Zadok's response was swift, definitive, and involved the kind of threat display that made everyone in the room suddenly remember they had urgent business elsewhere. The mechanical parent lasted approximately 3 seconds before Zadok demonstrated that Nethrak juveniles possessed both the ability and the inclination to reduce complex machinery to component parts using nothing but righteous indignation and really impressive claws. "Well," Park said, surveying the wreckage, "that's not what the simulations predicted." "The simulations," Emily pointed out, "probably didn't account for the fact that your robot moved like it was auditioning for a horror movie. If I were a sick Nethrak cub, I'd probably try to kill it too." The afternoon brought Communications Officer Walsh, who'd spent his off-duty hours learning to speak basic Nethrak phrases from the ship's linguistic database. His theory was refreshingly straightforward. Maybe they just needed to ask nicely in the right language. The pronunciation might be a bit off, he admitted, approaching Zadok's enclosure with the confidence of someone who'd never met a problem that couldn't be solved with better communication. But the intent should be clear. What followed was 3 minutes of Walsh attempting to explain the medical necessity of enzyme supplementation in a language that sounded like someone gargling gravel while angry. Zadok listened with the polite attention of a predator, deciding whether something was worth hunting, then responded with a series of clicks, growls, and harmonic tones that needed no translation. "I don't think that was yes," Walsh said weakly. "No," Emily agreed. "That was definitely go away before I decide you'd look better as a decorative wall hanging." By evening, Dr. Gwendolyn had moved on to increasingly desperate measures. The medical bay now resembled a combination laboratory and psychological warfare testing facility, complete with holographic displays showing idealized Nethrak family units enjoying healthy meals together. "The theory," she explained to Emily while adjusting the projector settings, "is that we can create positive associations with the medicine by presenting it in familiar social contexts." The holographic Nethrak family was impressive, Emily had to admit. The projections moved with predatory grace, their scales rippling with health and vitality as they shared what appeared to be a communal meal. It was like watching a nature documentary about the galaxy's most beautiful and dangerous dinner party. Zadok watched the display with interest for approximately 30 seconds, then did something that made Emily suspect Nethrak possessed a sense of humor. He turned his back on the projections and deliberately curled up facing the wall. "I think he's giving you the interstellar equivalent of the silent treatment," Emily observed. "This should be working," Dr. Gwendolyn muttered, frantically adjusting settings. "The behavioral models all suggest that juvenile Nethrak respond positively to pack imagery." "Maybe he's not interested in fake pack imagery," Emily said. "Maybe he wants the real thing." The final attempt of the day came courtesy of the ship's cultural database, which had finally connected them with a Nethrak colony representative via subspace communication. The being that appeared on the main display was everything human nightmares were made of. 8 feet of scaled muscle, claws that could probably cut through the display screen if they were real, and eyes that suggested this conversation was an unwelcome interruption to more important activities like hunting or conquering small planets. "You wish consultation regarding juvenile medical compliance," the Nethrak said in accented but perfectly clear standard. His voice carried the kind of authority that made everyone in the room instinctively check the exits. "Yes," Dr. Gwendolyn replied, her professional composure admirable given that she was essentially asking an apex predator for parenting advice. "The juvenile refuses to accept necessary medical treatment. We've tried multiple approaches. Juvenile refuses alien medicine, the Nethrak interrupted. This is correct behavior. You are not pack. You are not trusted. Juvenile chooses death over submission to potential enemies. This shows proper instinctual development. A moment of silence greeted this cheerful assessment. Surely there must be some way, Dr. Gwendolyn pressed. Some approach that would allow us to provide treatment? The Nethrak considered this with the kind of thoughtful expression that suggested he was weighing the entertainment value of human suffering against his time constraints. Juvenile will accept treatment from pack leader. You become pack leader. Problem is solved. And how exactly does one become a Nethrak pack leader? Emily asked. Defeat current pack leader in ritual combat. Demonstrate superiority through strength, cunning, and willingness to die for pack welfare. The Nethrak's expression might have been amusement. This typically involves significant bloodshed and has historically proven fatal to non-Nethrak participants. Right, Dr. Gwendolyn said faintly. Any other suggestions? Allow natural selection to proceed. Weak juveniles who cannot adapt to circumstances do not deserve to survive. This strengthens species over time. The communication ended with the kind of abrupt finality that suggested the Nethrak had better things to do than discuss the survival prospects of allegedly inferior species. Emily stared at the blank screen, processing what they'd just heard. Well, she said finally, that was educational. He basically told us to let Zadok die, Dr. Gwendolyn said, her voice hollow. Or become a Nethrak pack leader through ritual combat. Don't forget that option. Emily? This isn't funny. No, Emily agreed, looking through the barrier at Zadok, who was now lying on his side with the kind of stillness that suggested his condition was worsening rapidly. It's not funny at all. She stood up, pacing the small observation area with the restless energy of someone whose brain was working on a problem that refused to be solved through conventional thinking. Everything they'd tried had failed because they were approaching this like a human medical problem when it was clearly a Nethrak social problem. What if the cultural expert was right about one thing? She said suddenly. Which thing? The ritual combat or the letting him die? The pack leader part. Emily stopped pacing, an idea forming that was either inspired or completely insane. What if Zadok doesn't need us to become Nethrak? What if he needs us to prove we're worthy of his trust? Emily, we can't challenge him to ritual combat. Even if we could somehow win, which we couldn't, it would probably kill him in his current condition. No, not ritual combat. Emily moved closer to the barrier, studying Zadok's labored breathing. Something else. Something that shows we're willing to share the risk instead of just asking him to take it. Dr. Gwendolyn frowned. What kind of risk? Emily turned to face her, and something in her expression made the doctor take an involuntary step backward. The same risk we're asking him to take, Emily said quietly. What if someone took the medicine first? The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for moments when someone suggests something so obviously dangerous that it temporarily short-circuits everyone's ability to form coherent objections. Emily, Dr. Gwendolyn said very carefully, that medicine is formulated specifically for Nethrak physiology. The enzyme concentrations alone could cause severe metabolic disruption in humans. The delivery mechanism is designed for their digestive system, not ours. You could go into shock, suffer organ damage, or die, Emily finished. Yes, I am aware of the risks. Then you know this is impossible. Emily looked back at Zadok, whose golden eyes were watching her through the barrier with what might have been understanding or might have been the patient gaze of a predator waiting for prey to make a fatal mistake. "Maybe," she said, "but maybe impossible is exactly what we need right now." The medical bay had taken on the atmosphere of a pre-execution chamber, complete with the kind of tense silence that made everyone speak in whispers and check their exits twice. Emily stood before the medicine dispenser like she was facing down a firing squad, while Dr. Gwendolyn cycled through the various stages of medical professional grief: denial, anger, bargaining, and a desperate attempt to find some regulation that would prevent her colleague from committing spectacular suicide. "There has to be another way," Gwendolyn said for the 15th time in the past hour, clutching her medical scanner like a talisman against poor decision-making. "Some treatment protocol we haven't considered. Some approach that doesn't involve you potentially dying in front of our patient." "Feel free to suggest one," Emily replied, examining the small vial of Nethrac enzyme supplement with the detached curiosity of someone who'd made peace with the universe's sense of humor. The liquid inside was an unsettling shade of blue-green that seemed to shift colors depending on the angle, like looking at a small piece of trapped aurora. "Because, from where I'm standing, we've exhausted every conventional option except let him die and hope for a miracle." The medicine itself was deceptively innocuous. Barely 2 ounces of synthesized compounds designed to regulate Nethrac metabolic processes. The kind of routine pediatric treatment that should have been administered with a pat on the head and a promise of better days ahead. Except routine pediatric treatment assumed a level of trust that simply didn't exist between species that had spent millennia viewing each other as potential threats. The enzyme concentrations are calibrated for beings with 3 times our body mass and completely different liver function, Gwendolyn continued, her voice taking on the slightly desperate tone of someone watching a friend prepare to juggle live grenades. "The metabolic shock alone could put you in a coma." "Could," Emily agreed. "Or it could show Zadok that sometimes trust requires taking risks together instead of asking others to take them alone." She glanced through the barrier at their patient, who had been watching the proceedings with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for matters of life and death, which, she supposed, this technically was. Zadok's condition had deteriorated noticeably over the past few hours. His breathing was more labored, his scales had dulled to an unhealthy gray, and the medical readouts painted a picture that made Emily's proposed solution look almost reasonable by comparison. "Even if this works," Gwendolyn said, "even if you somehow survive taking medicine designed for a completely different species, there's no guarantee he'll interpret your actions the way you think he will. He might see it as weakness or strange behavior, or he might see it as what it is," Emily interrupted. "Someone willing to share the risk instead of just demanding trust." The past hour had been spent in frantic preparation for what Dr. Gwendolyn insisted on calling the most medically inadvisable experiment in the history of interspecies relations. Emergency medical equipment lined the observation area like sentries preparing for war. Cardiac monitors, metabolic stabilizers, and enough emergency drugs to restart a small planet's worth of vital organs. "If you go into shock," Gwendolyn said, running through her emergency protocols one more time, "I'll have approximately 3 minutes to counteract the enzyme disruption before it causes permanent damage. That's assuming I can identify which of your systems fail first, which is complicated by the fact that we have no baseline data for human reactions to Nethrac medicine. So, basically, you'll be improvising. I'll be performing emergency xenobiology on a colleague who's decided to use herself as a test subject for medicines that weren't designed for her species," Gwendolyn corrected. "There's a difference." Emily nodded, accepting the correction with the grace of someone who'd already committed to a course of action that definitely wasn't covered in any medical textbook. She'd spent the past hour researching everything the ship's database contained about Nethrak psychology, social behavior, and pack dynamics. The picture that emerged was of a species that valued courage, honesty, and the willingness to share risks, traits that made them formidable allies and absolutely terrifying enemies. The cultural analysis suggests that Nethrak pack leaders are chosen based on their willingness to face dangers on behalf of the group, she said, more to organize her own thoughts than to convince anyone else. They don't lead from behind. They lead from the front, taking the first risk and sharing the consequences. That's a lovely theory, Gwendolyn replied. Unfortunately, you're not actually a Nethrak pack leader, and this isn't actually a Nethrak pack. You're a human xenobiologist about to poison herself in front of a sick alien child. When you put it like that, it sounds almost reasonable. The moment of truth arrived, with all the ceremony of a medical emergency wrapped in a diplomatic crisis. Emily stood before Zadok's enclosure, the vial of medicine in her hand, while every piece of monitoring equipment in the bay focused on her vital signs, like she was about to attempt something historically significant or historically stupid. Zadok had positioned himself directly against the transparent barrier, those golden eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made Emily feel like she was being evaluated by something that could see straight through to her intentions. His breathing was shallow, labored, but his attention was absolutely focused. "All right," she said, addressing him directly. "Here's the thing about trust. It's not something you can fake, and it's not something you can demand. It's something you have to earn. And sometimes earning it means taking the same risks you're asking someone else to take." She held up the vial so he could see it clearly, the blue-green liquid catching the bay's lighting like captured starlight. "This is your medicine, the stuff that's supposed to make you better, help your body process nutrients properly, keep you from slowly starving to death from the inside out. Everyone's been trying to trick you into taking it, disguise it, make it seem like something it's not." Zadok's head tilted slightly, those predator eyes never leaving her face. "But here's what nobody's tried yet," Emily continued, raising the vial toward her lips, "showing you that sometimes the best way to prove something is safe is to take the risk yourself." "Emily, don't," Dr. Gwendolyn started. But Emily was already tipping the vial back, the alien medicine hitting her tongue like liquid fire mixed with the essence of things that shouldn't exist. The taste was indescribable. Imagine if someone had distilled the concept of metallic and combined it with flavors that human taste buds weren't equipped to process. It burned down her throat like molten copper, infused with the kind of bitterness that suggested evolution had specifically designed it to be unpalatable to anything that wasn't supposed to consume it. For a moment, nothing happened. Emily stood there, vial empty, waiting for either vindication or the kind of metabolic catastrophe that would make medical textbooks for generations. The monitoring equipment painted a tense picture of a human body, trying to process compounds it had never encountered before. Then the real fun began. The first sensation was heat, not the comfortable warmth of a fever, but the specific burning feeling of internal chemistry going places it was never meant to go. Emily's vision wavered as her liver attempted to process enzyme compounds designed for a completely different biological system, and her heart rate spiked as her cardiovascular system tried to figure out what exactly was happening to the rest of her. "Emily!" Dr. Gwendolyn's voice seemed to come from very far away, filtered through the rushing sound of blood that was suddenly very interested in going places other than where it was supposed to be. But Emily kept her eyes on Zadok, even as the medical bay began to take on the slightly unreal quality of a fever dream. The young Nethrak was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Was that concern? Curiosity? The patient interest of a predator watching prey do something inexplicably stupid? "Your turn," she managed to say, though speaking felt like trying to coordinate several complex biological processes that had decided they no longer wanted to work together. The metabolic storm hit about 30 seconds later, turning Emily's carefully regulated human biochemistry into something resembling a small-scale civil war. Her knees buckled, sending her to the floor of the observation area, while Dr. Gwendolyn scrambled to deploy enough emergency medical equipment to stock a small hospital. Through the chaos of alarms, shouted medical terminology, and the distinctly unpleasant sensation of her body forgetting how to process basic nutrients, Emily kept her focus on Zadok. The young Nethrak had moved closer to the barrier, pressing one clawed hand against the transparent aluminum as if trying to reach her. And then, in a moment that made all the pain and potential organ damage seem almost worthwhile, Zadok reached for his own medicine dispenser. He didn't hesitate, didn't fight, didn't display any of the stubborn resistance that had characterized every previous attempt at treatment. He simply took the medicine, swallowed it without protest, and settled back to watch the medical team work frantically to keep Emily's various biological systems from staging a complete revolt. "It worked," Emily whispered, just before the combination of alien enzymes and human biochemistry sent her into the kind of unconsciousness that medical professionals politely referred to as temporary metabolic adjustment. The last thing she saw before the lights went out was Zadok, still pressed against the barrier, those golden eyes watching her with what might have been understanding or gratitude, or the beginning of something that had never existed before between their species. Trust, it turned out, was a risk worth taking. Waking up from voluntary alien poisoning was, Emily discovered, an experience that no amount of xenobiology training could adequately prepare someone for. The first sensation was the distinct feeling that her internal organs had been rearranged by someone with a questionable understanding of human anatomy. The second was the realization that she was still alive, which came as something of a surprise given the enthusiastic way her body had embraced unconsciousness 12 hours earlier. "Welcome back to the land of the living," Dr. Gwendolyn said, her voice carrying the particular blend of relief and professional irritation reserved for colleagues who'd survived doing something spectacularly stupid. "Your liver function is back to normal. Your enzyme levels have stabilized, and I've added a new regulation to the medical handbook specifically prohibiting xenobiologists from using themselves as test subjects for alien medicine." Emily attempted to sit up, a process that involved negotiations between her brain and various muscle groups that seemed to have developed trust issues during her metabolic adventure. "How long was I unconscious?" 14 hours, 36 minutes, and 22 seconds, Gwendolyn replied with the precision of someone who'd been counting. "During which time your body processed compounds designed for a species with 3 stomach chambers and blood chemistry that would be toxic to most carbon-based life forms. The fact that you're conscious and coherent suggests either remarkable human adaptability or divine intervention." "How's Zadok?" The question hung in the air for a moment, and Emily caught something in Gwendolyn's expression that suggested the answer was more complicated than a simple medical update. "See for yourself," Gwendolyn said, helping Emily to her feet and guiding her toward the observation window. What Emily saw made her question whether the alien medicine had caused permanent neurological damage, because what she was observing couldn't possibly be real. Zadok was not only moving around his enclosure with obvious signs of improved health. His scales had regained their natural luster. His breathing was clear and strong, and his movements carried the fluid grace of a predator in peak condition. But more importantly, and more impossibly, he was demonstrating behavior that had never been documented in any Nethrak research study. He was bringing her gifts. "Is that—" Emily squinted at the collection of items arranged near the barrier. "A dead maintenance drone?" "Among other things," Gwendolyn confirmed. "He's been hunting small mechanical devices throughout the ship for the past 6 hours. The engineering department is filing formal complaints, but they're also utterly fascinated. Apparently, no one's ever seen a Nethrak demonstrate gift-giving behavior toward a non-pack member before." The collection was both touching and slightly disturbing in the way that gifts from apex predators tend to be. Alongside the deceased maintenance drone were several small tools that had mysteriously vanished from various workstations, a decorative plant from the officer's mess that showed signs of having been carefully uprooted rather than simply destroyed, and what appeared to be someone's personal data pad, now bearing the distinctive marks of Nethrak claws. "He's been taking things?" Emily asked. "Hunting things," Gwendolyn corrected. "There's a difference, apparently. According to the ship's behavioral analysis subroutines, he's demonstrating classic pack provisioning behavior, bringing food and useful items to a pack member who's unable to hunt for themselves." Emily stared at the bizarre collection, trying to process the implications. "He thinks I'm part of his pack." "More than that." Gwendolyn pulled up a series of bioscan readings on her tablet. "Remember how I mentioned that taking the medicine triggered something in his biology? It turns out that something was significant enough to register on our medical sensors. The readings showed a complex pattern of neurochemical changes in Zadok's brain, concentrated in areas associated with social bonding and pack recognition. Emily had seen similar patterns in her research on various species, but never in connection with interspecies relationships. "This is a bonding response," she said, scrolling through the data. "But Nethrak don't bond with other species. It's never been documented, never been observed, never been considered theoretically possible." "Apparently, it's possible under very specific circumstances," Gwendolyn said. "The xenopsychology department has been reviewing the literature since yesterday, and they've found references to something called adoption protocols in very old Nethrak cultural texts, theoretical frameworks for accepting non-Nethrak into pack structures, but only when certain behavioral and psychological criteria are met." "What kind of criteria?" "Willingness to share risk, demonstration of pack loyalty, physical courage in defense of pack welfare." Gwendolyn looked at Emily with an expression that mixed admiration with exasperation. "Basically, everything you did when you took that medicine." The implications hit Emily like a small, controlled explosion in her chest. She hadn't just solved a medical problem. She'd accidentally triggered an evolutionary response that had been dormant in Nethrak psychology for millennia. The willingness to share risk, to put herself in danger for Zadok's welfare, had somehow activated biological and psychological mechanisms that allowed him to recognize her as pack. "So what does this mean, practically speaking?" Emily asked. "It means," said a new voice from the bay entrance, "that you've accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history." Captain Morrison entered the observation area with the measured pace of someone who'd been dealing with increasingly strange reports for the past day, and had finally decided to see the situation for himself. He was followed by Commander Walsh from Communications and Dr. Hendricks from the Xenopsychology Department, both carrying the kind of equipment that suggested this had become an official research event. "Captain," Emily said, attempting something resembling military courtesy, despite the fact that she was wearing medical scrubs and had recently survived voluntary poisoning. "Emily," Morrison replied, I understand you've managed to form an interspecies pack bond with the most dangerous predator species in known space. Would you care to explain how this happened? It was an accident, Emily said honestly. I was trying to solve a medical problem, not revolutionize interspecies relations. Nevertheless, Dr. Hendricks interjected, setting up his scanning equipment with obvious excitement, what you've achieved represents a fundamental breakthrough in our understanding of Nethrak psychology and social behavior. The bonding response you triggered hasn't been observed in over 2,000 years of galactic contact with their species. Through the barrier, Zadok had noticed the increased activity and moved closer to the transparent aluminum, those golden eyes tracking each new arrival with predatory precision. When his gaze settled on Emily, however, his posture relaxed into something that looked remarkably like contentment. He's been protective, Gwendolyn added. When the engineering team came to retrieve their missing equipment, he positioned himself between them and the barrier. Classic pact defense behavior. Protective of what? Emily asked. You, Morrison said simply. According to his behavioral patterns, he now considers you a pack member who's recovering from injury. He's been guarding you while you were unconscious. The weight of this information settled over Emily like a comfortable but complicated blanket. She'd gained the trust and loyalty of a being whose species was legendary for their inability to form relationships outside their own kind. It was an extraordinary scientific achievement, a diplomatic breakthrough, and a personal responsibility that she had absolutely no idea how to handle. What happens now? She asked. Now, Morrison said, we discover what it means to have a human Nethrak pack bond in the middle of galactic civilization. The Xenopsychology Department wants to study the relationship. The Diplomatic Corps is interested in the implications for future Nethrak contact. And the Medical Department is fascinated by the biological mechanisms involved. And Zadok? Will remain with you, apparently, Dr. Hendricks said, consulting his readings. The bonding response appears to be permanent, at least according to what we know about Nethrak psychology. He's imprinted on you as a pack member, which means separating you could cause significant psychological distress. Emily looked through the barrier at Zadok, who was now arranging his collection of gifts in what appeared to be some kind of meaningful pattern. The dead maintenance drone had been positioned prominently in the center, surrounded by the various tools and personal items he'd acquired during his hunting expeditions. He's trying to provide for me, she realized. The gifts aren't random. They're supplies. Things he thinks I might need. Pack provisioning behavior, Hendricks confirmed. He's fulfilling his role as a pack member by ensuring you have access to resources. The fact that his understanding of human needs is somewhat limited doesn't diminish the intent. As if responding to their conversation, Zadok approached the barrier and placed one clawed hand against the transparent aluminum, the same gesture he'd made while Emily was unconscious. This time, Emily matched the gesture from her side, her human hand pressed against the barrier opposite his claws. The moment was electric, a connection between two beings who should have been natural enemies, but had somehow found common ground in shared risk and mutual trust. Through the barrier, Emily could see intelligence in those golden eyes, recognition, and something that might have been affection, or at least the Nethrak equivalent of it. Well, Morrison said, after observing this interspecies moment, I suppose we'll need to make some adjustments to your living arrangements, and probably file some rather unusual reports with Galactic Command. Sir? Emily asked. Congratulations, Emily, Morrison said, with the dry humor of a starship captain who'd seen enough strange things to take most surprises in stride. You're now the first human in galactic history to have a Nethrak pack member. I hope you're prepared for the lifestyle changes that entails. As if to If emphasized the point, Zadok made a series of clicking sounds that needed no translation. He was clearly indicating his approval of this arrangement. Emily found herself smiling despite the complexity of her situation. She'd set out to solve a simple medical problem and ended up forging the first documented human-Nethrak bond in galactic history. Not bad for a day's work, even if it had involved nearly dying from voluntary alien poisoning. "I suppose," she said, watching Zadok settle contentedly against the barrier, "I should start learning more about Nethrak pack dynamics." Among other things, Morrison agreed, "Welcome to your new life, Emily. Try not to let your pack member eat any more of our equipment." Outside the medical bay, the Mercy's wing continued its journey through space, carrying what might be the most unusual family unit in galactic civilization toward whatever adventures awaited them among the stars. And in Medical Bay 3, a human and a Nethrak settled in to figure out what trust looked like when it crossed species lines and changed the galaxy forever.